A very good evening and welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. Well, tonight on the show we talk about children's nutrition. Sustainable Development Goal 2.2 says it's supposed to end all forms of malnutrition by 2030. Everyone has a role to play in child nutrition, from the parents, the guardians, the educators, the health workers, communities and governments. And that's why we thought that it would be very important to have a section of women who are in all of these fields. They're all mothers for starters, then they're educators, then we have people from the medical field. So we thought it would be important to have a conversation on your child and what they're feeding on. Welcome, ladies, to the program.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll quickly introduce all of you, and I'll start with Lydia Nyesugomwe, who is right next to me. Lydia is an early childhood development specialist. She's worked with children, youth and families for all of her 20-year career. She's an educator, counselor, trainer, proprietor of Parenting Uganda. She's also a country representative for Holt International Children's Services, and she is a mother and a grandmother.
Yes.
A grandmother with no grey hair. Right. And right next to her we have Dr. Sabrina Chitaka, who is a pediatrician. Dr. Sabrina, it's good to have you once again on the show.
Thank you.
And then we have Doreen Mazakwe Semuju, who is an she's a medical doctor, a breastfeeding clinician, and a nutritionist in training. You're very welcome, Doreen.
Thank you, Josephine.
And finally, Audrey Dralega, who is an education consultant, early years enthusiast, mother of 4, been in the education profession since 1984 when she started teaching. She has an organization which deals with people and which called People and Potential, which works on school improvement. You're all very welcome. Audrey, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let's say it as it is. Right. So when we say child nutrition, in terms of Uganda, what comes to your mind?
First of all, the nutrition in Uganda is getting better. Previously, we had statistics like 42% of Ugandans are stunted. That means they've had long-term malnutrition. But today, the figure has dropped to between 32 and 37%. So I think we are getting better, especially as our economy is improving.
Okay, so when you say we're getting better, do we still then say we have issues of malnourished children? And I'm not just talking about Kampala, because it's easy to see the people in Kampala.
This is statistics for the entire country.
Okay.
And when we talk about stunting, we are looking at long-term malnutrition, because stunting really looks at your height for age and height for weight, and it looks at the ultimate, how tall are you going to be when you grow up. But acute malnutrition is still a problem.
Okay.
And it's still a problem because maybe some mothers don't know how to feed their children. And for me, it's the acute malnutrition that I'm more concerned about.
Okay.
Children who come in because they don't have enough protein, and then they develop a condition called kwashiorkor, you know, the swelling up of the body and then the rashes. That acutely affects their brain. And then when you have low energy, severe malnutrition, that is severe acute malnutrition with no edema, that's also a problem. Because subsequently, these children suffer from conditions like insulin inefficiency, and their brains are also damaged. Their kidneys could get damaged, their muscles. So for me, a child who is well nourished is a child who's going to cope well in school and have a good outcome.
Well, you mentioned school, and I'm glad we have educators here. When do you guys see these children come into school and you think there's a problem, and how do you then begin to even address it as an educator?
Actually, let me take this one. As Dr. Sabrina was speaking, I was thinking about the difference between malnutrition and just being generally undernourished. Because what sometimes happens in the urban centers is that we have children who are eating certain food groups only. And as a result, they're undernourished. I'm not sure if that counts as being having malnutrition, but they're undernourished. And even sometimes in very wealthy homes, we can find children that are eating only particular foods, particularly fried foods, lots of chips, and even lots of meats. And sometimes parents can think that that's lots and lots of nourishment, but in actual fact the children are lacking sometimes in vitamins and other nutrients, and sometimes they are dehydrated. And I think we do need to focus quite a lot on making sure that children are properly hydrated, as well as having vitamins and fats and carbohydrates.
Are you able to see it in a child when they come to a school? Lydia, for example, in school, you see children come in and you're able to think there might be a problem here, and how do I begin to address it?
Yes. For us who are dealing with the young ones, we do screening. The first thing we do is to screen, and definitely when you screen a child, you definitely tell whether that child is undernourished or not.
What do you mean by screening?
You look at the age of the child, and then you take their weight and height, and you do the arm circumference and that stuff, and you're able to tell whether that child is well fed or not. So you can tell, yes.
So do you ever say, maybe we're going to sit down with the parent of this child and have a conversation on maybe how they're feeding this child at home, or what's happening? Do you ever do that?
Yes, and maybe to take you back, for me, I look at this whole feeding process as something that should start from home before they even come to school, because how we feed at home, how we prepare food, definitely has an impact on how the children's health is going to be. So we're looking at involving mothers as early as possible, even before they become pregnant, even when they are pregnant, before birth, so that they keep it in mind that, you know, it's something that they have to monitor when they're pregnant, when they give birth, through breastfeeding. Then they start introducing the foods. Okay. What kind of foods do they introduce? So that we don't wait to see them at school.
All right.
Yeah.
I think, oh yes.
I liked what Lydia said about even before they become pregnant. You know how moms fuss a lot when they are already pregnant, and then the husband buys them all these nicey things and whatever she craves for, they buy for her in loads.
They're not always nice things, but yes.
Sometimes they are like grasshoppers and things like that. However, I think even before a woman starts to, you know, become pregnant, she should plan for the pregnancy 2 months before she becomes pregnant. And that's part of the 1,000 days. The first 1,000 days of a baby start from 60 days before the mom becomes pregnant, because then mom needs to prepare for things like folic acid, the multivitamins in her body, the energy she needs to become pregnant, and even carry her throughout the pregnancy.
But this is with the assumption that all the mothers out there planned to get pregnant.
Josephine, the hope is eventually we should all plan for that pregnancy.
Okay.
It's true that, you know, sometimes it's not planned, but the ideal would be for people to plan.
Okay. Well, let's go past the 9 months. Let's go into the babies here, and I'll pick on you here, Doreen, because you're very quiet. I know your particular area is breastfeeding. How are we doing on breastfeeding?
Well, the current statistic from a survey done in 2016, which is the Uganda Demographic and Health Survey, says that 66% of our children are exclusively breastfed.
Is that a good thing? Are we doing better than the before years, or are we?
Yes, we are doing better than the before years, because about, say, within a range of 15 years, the first statistic around there is about 60%.
Okay.
Then 62.5%, then 66%. And so that means we are moving several steps ahead to make sure that most children are exclusively breastfed. One thing to note is that the World Health Organization has a scorecard where they want every country to be at least 50%.
So we've gone beyond.
That means we've gone beyond.
We're doing well.
Yes, we are doing well. Although I think the country's target is about 75%.
Okay.
As a breastfeeding supporter, I think, though, that we might be in a stagnant place for about that much time. And we can do much better, and we definitely have issues we can work around to.
Yes, and some of the issues are, so you have a mother who has a baby and she says the milk is not coming out, right? Then you have another mother who says, I don't want to lose my shape, so I'm not going to breastfeed. And then you have others who tell you the child reached a point and they just didn't want to breastfeed, maybe after 2 months. So what are we doing to help all of these mothers?
Well, I think Uganda is a country that has a very strong breastfeeding culture, meaning that there is no question about breastfeeding. It's very difficult to find a family that says, I won't breastfeed because I don't want to. And that is because we've seen our mothers breastfeeding, our grandparents breastfeed our parents, and so it's the culture. That's what I mean by a strong breastfeeding culture.
I would like to see that culture trickle down into offices, that offices now begin to make space for women to breastfeed.
To come in and breastfeed them properly.
And there are so many options around the workplace. There is the mother going to the baby, taking milk to the baby, mother meeting the baby halfway, say a daycare center or a place where she has the baby, and all the flexi-time options in the workplace.
I was reading an article in the newspapers recently, and they were talking about now mothers who have extra milk can now express and, you know, share it with others. Yes, talk to me about that, because I mentioned it in the office and somebody had this face of how, you know? Yes.
You know, breast milk banks are actually, they've been there for a very long time. I first saw a breast milk bank in Japan in 1998. Moms would come in and pump out their milk and donate it to preemies whose moms were not able to produce enough milk. I know that Dr. Victoria Nachibuka in Zambia has started the very first breast milk bank in Uganda, and it's doing well. The only catch is the moms have to be screened for diseases like HIV, like hepatitis B, but the breast milk can be shared.
There are people who were called wet nurses. So they breastfed children who they didn't birth. Maybe the mother passed away or something. Even grandparents of babies were able to breastfeed their children, because if you have carried a pregnancy to term before, you can produce milk. And there are those who even go as far as inducing breast milk even when they've never been pregnant.
There are some logistical problems for some moms that would prefer to give their own milk. And I know that there are organizations that advocate for workplace childcare to allow moms to breastfeed, because we know the practicalities. If you live in Tinder and you're working in town, getting your nanny to bring that baby within your lunch hour and you feed, the baby decides to cooperate. Babies have their own timetable. You can bring the baby and the baby decides not to feed in your lunch hour. Now what do you do? So I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention the name of an organization, but the Cradle is advocating very strongly for workplace creches, allowing women to return to work and to continue breastfeeding. I think it's a great idea. There are other organizations that are also doing that. And that would enable moms to breastfeed for longer. But there's also the other aspect. Some babies refuse breast milk at 3 or 4 months.
Yes, that's what I actually wanted to ask. So what happens then when your child just stops?
You know, children do refuse breast milk because maybe they are allergic to a component in milk called lactogen or lactose. They just reject it because they cannot speak to you. They just say, I'm not taking it, either because it hurts their tummy or because it makes them get a rash or something, or get a running stomach. So it's important to look at each baby individually. Is it because they have nipple confusion that mom has been giving them a quicker option, you know, milk from a bottle, and then giving her their own breast milk that is difficult to suckle? So you need to sort out the puzzle for each individual baby. When mom comes and says, my baby has refused to breast milk, the typical thing I'll ask is, are you giving any other milk?
Okay.
Is the milk enough? Because it also gets frustrating for a baby. They're trying to suckle and then there's not enough milk, then everyone is angry, and, you know, or the position in which mom is holding that baby, like holding the baby upside down instead of cradling the baby and making the baby comfortable. All those things can affect the baby's want for the milk.
Oh, I know now we have people called breastfeeding consultants. Yes, so they come and teach you. They come and teach you how to, I don't know, football position. I don't know what position.
There's actually something called a nursing strike, where the baby just refuses to breastfeed, and usually it's for a temporary reason. One of the things I do, because I see babies from birth, and you know, on to 2 years. So some of these babies have issues in their mouth. They have restrictions in their mouth. For example, the commonest thing I find is a tongue tie. So the baby just keeps slipping off the breast. They can't latch, and so the mother tells you, you know, this baby tries to latch on, you know, several times and just gives up and cries. And then of course the mother is thinking, what do I do? Most of our mothers are not taught things like hand expression so that they can have the milk expressed and feed the baby while you figure out what the problem is. So these are some things that, like Dr. Sabrina has said, we need to check for those things, and they are individual things. Okay. Sometimes the baby has a cold, sometimes they have strained neck muscles from birth.
It could even be the mom's issue. Like some people have inverted nipples, or the nipple is too big for the baby's mouth. So it's different.
There's so many things.
But there's a way around to all of this.
There's a way around to all of this.
I think there is a way around all that, but mothers out there are lacking information. They are stuck, especially first-time mothers.
Actually, our antenatal statistics are very good.
All right.
And so it's a good opportunity.
So let's take a short break right now, but we'll continue this conversation when we return. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center, Nile Room. So we're talking about breastfeeding, but beyond breastfeeding now. So we've gone past the first 6 months. Now we're at, say, 7 months and going on. And a child has already been exposed to these particular juices, packaged juices, or these foods. How do you help a child who is stuck on a particular diet and transition them to healthier options?
I think, like we mentioned previously, there is need to educate our mothers from when we have them. And we have so many opportunities with mothers in antenatal care, at birth,
in bridal showers,
immunization, in bridal and baby showers.
In the well baby clinics, in the early child days care centers.
So we have so many opportunities to give our mothers information. I always say that at 6 months, if your child is exclusive breastfed or feeding on only milk without other foods being introduced, the child's taste buds are like a blank slate.
So you shape them.
You paint anything you want on them. If you want this child to grow loving sugar, that's the right time to indoctrinate them. Of course, I'm saying this in a satirical way, but what I mean is if you want your child to choose things which are healthy, you introduce them right at 6 months. You don't wait for the child to grow older to say, I want dodo, for you to give it to them, because they won't. And I have this experience with my children. The first one was introduced to yogurt, and it was plain. So even up to now, when she's almost 6, she happily eats plain yogurt and sweet yogurt. Now my son, we gave him some plain yogurt, and then because of access issues, we gave him the sweetened one. He's not the type who would hurry to go for plain yogurt, and that's simply because of that. Okay. Greens. I did the same thing with my daughter. Greens, purples, things that don't necessarily taste that nice. And now it's a challenge to encourage her to eat purples. But my son ate purples from 6 months. He eats, you know, much of it. So you do this
blank, it's up to you as the parent.
Slate is blank, it's up to you to do the right thing, but you need the information of what to give.
So how do schools help this process? How do they promote healthy feeding for children? So the child comes to you and they've already been shaped from home. It's really not up to you what they started with, but now they've come to you. What happens?
I think the most important thing is to first establish the routine at home. Like in some of the schools I know, because they provide meals at school, it is very important to first know how these children have been feeding at home, so that you create a link to what is being given at school.
But do educators have the time to meet every parent and say, what have you been feeding, you know? The child, a parent, because I know what happens is that parents drop the child and they're in a hurry to go to work.
That's right. Some schools do. Others are really commercial. You know what I mean. They are too busy. A mom comes, she's on a hurry, she's going to work, she will just drop her child, and off they will go. Other schools will prepare seminars, for beginners, and they will take them through, what they feed the children at school, and they allow the parents to contribute and know what they feed their children at home so that they can strike a balance. Other schools will share their menus. They will give you a copy of what they prepare at school so you can have it at home, and then you supplement to make sure that a child gets something good out of the
But
place.
Isn't that true for the private schools and the well-to-do schools?
That's right.
Because I do know that in most of our up-country schools, they cannot afford to have even a balanced diet.
They can't even, for starters, they can't even have a decent meal at school. In up-country, children come with packed lunch, and what they pack is another story, because it's what basically is at home. Those that don't pack, they will give, 500 shillings to a child, and they'll say, on your way, pass by the chapati man, or by, that kiosk and buy a pancake, and you go to school, and that's it. Yeah, so there's a big challenge.
And maybe that even contributes to the high rates of malnutrition.
Right.
Yeah, because when you look at malnutrition in its real sense, we have children who are overnourished or who are, tending to obese. Although in Uganda it's not a real problem. A student of ours did a study, and the prevalence of obesity, even in the posh schools, was 6%. Which isn't really a problem, but we shouldn't be celebrating about 6%. No. We should be concerned because the rates are going up. Yeah. However, my concern to the parents is that child who is given a piece of potato or a piece of cassava, and all they find at school is tea with no milk, no sugar, nothing, or just plain water. That child is getting heavy load of carbohydrate, and no protein, no multivitamins, nothing.
I think then the issue then comes to, this is what the parent can afford to give them. And there's really no two ways about solving that issue, because this is what I can afford to give my child. I want the child to go to school. This is what they're going to eat at home anyway.
But some years ago, my husband was telling me that in the villages, people used to grow more fruits. And when we go to the village now, we find that there are lots and lots of compounds. There's no pawpaw, there are no bananas, there's no lemons, there's no oranges. Now, the part of it maybe is public education, because back in the day, from what I am hearing, the people used to take more of an interest in what was happening in their community. So it wasn't down to the individual family only, but they'd come around, they'd inspect your compound to make sure it's tidy, your toilet is covered, and so on, and you're growing some fruits. Now, to grow a pawpaw is not actually too difficult if you have space. If you're in an urban area there's no garden, then it's really a challenge. But up country, people sometimes can grow those things. But they don't necessarily see it as being necessary, and they don't see it as being their responsibility as parents.
That's right.
So some of it can be public education, and then it's low cost.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, there are families that will grow those things, the fruits. They'll have the chicken, they have eggs, but they sell them because
they have to get
very
fees
true.
to do.
Yeah, very true.
So they have the balanced diet, but they sell it away,
Yes.
and the child is...
It's not seen as important.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of you mentioned something about, and I think it was you, Lydia, about schools where they required the children to pack lunches. I know it happens for a lot of schools.
Yes.
Would you rather that children pack lunches, or would you rather that the schools provide the food?
I would prefer, it depends on whether we're talking about the urban or the rural schools, because now we're talking about schools having more gardens and growing a wider variety.
That is the rural school.
the rural schools. But even some of the urban schools are now starting.
They have gardens away from
their own gardens.
And you know, there are creative ways of growing more crops without having masses of space. You can grow things vertically, but again, it's about information and people taking an interest.
So what I'm picking from you, Audrey, is you'd rather the schools provide the meals?
Because then it's
Not
standard.
100%.
It's standard.
I'm not saying 100% because there are always children that have dietary issues and it's difficult. Let me just give a very short example. I went into one school and I found the children on a particular day were looking very downhearted. And so I said to some of them, what's happened? Why are you all looking so sad? And they said, this is the day that they give us boiled eggs. So, I mean, the schools also have to be sensitive to what children can happily eat. I'm not saying that we shouldn't give them boiled eggs. We should, because it's a lot of protein and other things. But if they're going to hide it under the table and they don't want to eat it, it's a bit pointless. So yes, I think if you're looking at mass nutrition and you're looking at increasing nutrition on a wide scale, it's a good thing for the schools to think about providing a balanced diet. There's a school I heard of where the headmaster would go in. I read about this school actually. There's a headmaster would go in when the children are eating their snack from home, and he would just ask them, do you have something from the mountains and something from the sea? In other words, from the mountains are plants and proteins, the animals. From the sea, there's a Japanese school, there's seaweeds and fish and seafoods. And he would just ask them to look in their own lunchbox and decide, do I have something from the mountains and the sea? Now, those children would then go home and say, Mommy, thank you for my lunch. Can I have something from the mountains today? Or can I have something from the sea? And if you educate children as well, because sometimes we guilt trip parents, but we can also educate children, and the children will say, Mom, could I please have some fruit? Could I have some chopped carrot? Could I? So the children themselves start asking for a healthy snack. That way you get a balance.
And one of the good ways of teaching children about these foods and balanced foods is growing these things at home with them. You know, so that when, you know, I do this a lot. I tell my son, please go get me some rosemary. So he just goes out there and picks a herb. Or I say, pull up a carrot for me, and he knows these things come from the soil.
You have a garden, Doreen. Yes, I do.
Yeah, we all have gardens.
No, don't say we have a small. People live in apartments that are, so it's concrete everywhere.
But you can
still put something on the pots and things.
Yeah, in the sacks.
Feels like you're all attacking me, but
yeah, you asked for it. I think I like that point of involving children in planting those backyard, participating in planting vegetables and fruits around the house, but also involving them to prepare the food.
yes.
I've shared with mothers quite a lot of times that when children participate in preparing food, they look forward to eating what they have prepared. Or when you keep sending them, go and bring me the onion leaves and be here and chop this and this and for me, they all look forward to the meal that they have.
My son who's 12, he's the chef at home. He prepares his own food, how he likes it, but one thing he knows is his plate should have at least 5 colors.
Yes.
I liked what Audrey said about food from the mountain and the sea. In Uganda, we don't really have a sea. However, we can use children as change agents and tell them your plate of food must have at least 5 colors. The 5 colors will eventually balance out all the nutrient values that are required.
Okay,
So the white or yellow,
for example,
the white or yellow,
with 5 colors.
the white or yellow should be the carbohydrate. It could be matoke. I'm a Muganda, so the matoke should be there.
Wait, matoke is
Yellow,
okay.
and or white posho or rice or chapati for that matter.
Potato.
Since we are coming to the Rolex festival soon, then the green should you will provide you with minerals. The orange will also provide you with minerals.
What's orange?
Or
Potato.
Carrots.
Okay,
potato.
okay.
Then the brown could be beans or meat. Already we have 4 colors. And then the colorless is water. And kids need a lot of water to hydrate, you know, the problem of dehydration.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow. All right, so let's take another quick break, and we'll be right back to wrap up our conversation. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. We're coming to you from the Kampala Serena Conference Center Nile Room. Now, there's a report that says, the Global Nutrition Report, 2017 states that nutrition should be placed at the heart of efforts to end poverty, fight disease, raise educational standards, and tackle climate change. How do we break this down to a mother or a father, a parent, a guardian that is watching?
So the first thing I would say is that indeed nutrition is health. We should all have the adage that says that health starts in your homes and then it's treated in the hospitals. So if we have a healthy home, healthy food, then the majority of diseases will be curtailed.
Okay.
And obviously if we are eating healthy, then the cost of living will go down, because if your child is unwell because they have coughs and flus and diarrhea and all those other things, then you're going to spend more in the hospital.
Do you think that all players understand the cost of malnutrition?
Maybe not, but eventually they will understand it. You know, if you look at the G8 countries, the ones that are well-to-do, the majority of their people are actually very tall and healthy. Not obese. Well, I need to take that back and say that if you compare the height of the wealthy countries and the very poor countries, it's quite obvious.
Yeah.
And even as we become more economically sound, people will understand that I don't have to give birth to so many children because some of them may not survive. People will be careful. They will plan for their pregnancies. They will care for their pregnancy, that, you know, and eventually the children will be cared for. For us as parents, we need to demand from the schools, give our children the correct food. I wouldn't like to walk into a school canteen and find oily food and food that's not worth it. I want the teachers to be engaged and involved. Subsequently, as children eat a balanced diet, they'll become more alert, they'll be more innovative, and that's what we want really as a country.
Before I go to the what's in the canteens at school, you've mentioned twice about height being an issue. Mm-hmm. And I know that my friends who are not very tall,
they're called vertically challenged.
Might have a problem with me when I get off this show to explain why we are saying they're malnourished, because they are not the height that, you know. So do you want to put that into context?
So there are certain, well, the maximum height of an individual for a girl should be the average height of both her parents and then minus 13. And then the average height of a boy should be the average height of both parents plus 13 centimeters. So it depends on how tall your parents were, but also in the current context of how well you're eating. We know that if somebody is chronically malnourished, they are chronically ill, they may not attain their maximum height.
Okay, okay. Also then now let's come to the issue of what's in the canteens. So Lydia and Audrey, I'm looking at you now. So in the canteens there's mandazi, there's chapati. I'm very certain this is what's in all of the canteens. There's chapati, there's samosas, there's
buns,
sausages.
Yes, but you see, it's not even just in the canteens. Have you ever tried going on a low-carb diet where you're trying to cut out carbohydrates, including sugar, just from the office? It's actually very difficult because most of the suppliers are supplying those heavily carb-laden foods and sugar-laden foods and salt-laden foods. So yes, some of the school canteens will supply those things. It's sometimes not that easy to provide a very balanced canteen. I'm speaking as a head teacher here, as a former head teacher, where...
But on whose side are you, Audrey?
I'm a parent, but I know that is my responsibility as a parent.
Audrey, be on the side of the teachers, because we are holding you accountable at this point.
No, but I was a head teacher, and I went very heavily towards having a healthy, balanced tuck shop. But storing apples, washing them, bananas, the children don't want them if they look bruised, how long will they last? It was very difficult to provide fruits. And this was a sort of high-end school. Now, it meant that then we had to encourage children to bring in fruits, and then they started selling them at the end of the day as well. But sometimes it's not always easy for snack. For lunches, yes, you can provide more vegetables. and encourage children. But then it needs monitoring, because some of those children will make sure they skip past the vegetable part.
And take off.
Yeah. And they'll take off. They do.
They do.
And sometimes you have to be very, very vigilant and say, please go back and take some vegetables. Please go back and take some fruit. Please go back and have you drunk your water? And in some schools that happens a lot. And in others it may be a little bit lacking. So all we can do is raise awareness and hope that more and more schools start taking this seriously and encouraging children to eat balanced.
Lydia, you work with younger groups of children. So you're really at the beginning.
Yes.
With below 2 and just slightly above 2. How do you do it to ensure that a child who comes from home and all they like is chips and chaps and suddenly gets into the whole, I can eat beans and not die?
For starters, when parents bring their children, you know, the first story is that my child will not eat beans, they will not eat, you know, mashed potatoes, they will not go for, you know, this and that and that and that. They can only, they actually go ahead and pack those things in their bags. And they will insist that make sure you give this and this at break time and this at snack time. But the beauty with young children is that, you know, they adjust quickly. Once you set, you know, a timetable for them, a feeding plan for them, they can quickly adjust to that. But I just had a comment about the canteens. All I want to say to people out there, especially schools out there in the rural, I think someone needs to take keen interest about what they put in the canteens. We cannot just let it like that. I mean, you go to canteens and all you find are exactly the head teachers, because sometimes the canteen is not run by the school. They will get someone from outside the school who will just come and put a canteen, and maybe they pay a certain fee to the school. But I just want to say that the head teachers or the proprietors of the schools need to take that interest to make sure that what is put in that canteen is healthy.
True.
Because our children are feeding on wrong things.
Josephine,
it's very quickly.
Yes, I actually wanted to say that I'm actually doing, for my master's project, doing some work in a school. And it's interesting that out of, let's say, 600 parents who we sent our questionnaires to, we have like a quarter of them responding. And some of them say, our children are not obese, our children are not having any problems. So I wanted to highlight the responsibility of our parents as well. We might be pointing fingers at the educationists and saying, Lydia, what are you doing? Audrey, what are you doing?
But these educationists and doctors are all parents, mothers.
Yeah. Well,
so pointing fingers at yourselves.
Yes, we need to take responsibility for the health of our children, because out of 12 weeks that a child spends at school, they spend quite an amount at school and very little time with us. So just the weekend. And so, you know, you might find one of the things that depresses me the most is when I look at the bucket which has cups for water and it's almost empty. That means the children are not taking this water. And when you ask them about a 24-hour recall, what did you eat, you say 24 hours ago? And you ask them, did you eat any fruit, any vegetable? Some of them will flat out say no. Others, when you ask them vegetable, they'll tell you a fruit. So some of this thing is information, but also I think some of us don't take these things very seriously, as long as we see our children growing taller at school
and hitting
with
the
menu
we read about.
Yes, so we think everything is okay.
But I'm also glad that the school health policy is soon going to come out, and the school health policy is going to be really tough on the early learners and the middle learners and right up to the university students. So I'm happy it's going to happen.
And by tough, you mean?
As in, there's going to be strict rules on how children should be cared for, including their nutrition, their well baby checks, their health checks, immunization. So I think for me that is walking in the right direction.
Okay. Well, yes, Lydia.
Yeah, I just also wanted to talk to parents out there. The way we feed, I felt we shouldn't ignore that, because the way we feed at home is it directly affects the way our children will feed later on. Sometimes you want children to eat those veggies and the fruits and do this, when actually you are not eating them
yourself.
Very important. So the same thing at school. Sometimes you want children to eat certain things, but the teachers are eating something totally different. Teachers have come with their packed snacks, which are, you know, totally different from what the children are eating, and so it makes children get confused. So if we are to train children to eat healthy, we have to learn to model to them what it means to eat healthy.
Right. And as we close, so my final question before I ask you to all make your closing remarks. So we know that we can buy foods from supermarkets these days, and this is baby food that's packed, right? How safe is this food?
For me, the most important thing is look at the expiration date. If it's not expired, then it's okay.
Contents?
The contents should be balanced.
I would add to that. You see, a lot of these baby foods that are marketed are so expensive.
Exactly.
And yet in the market, the fruits and the vegetables in Uganda are fresh. They're fantastic.
And you also
Why
don't know
spend all that money?
what they're using to preserve those
things.
The foods.
So the fresher, the better.
All right. So I'll start from you, Audrey. Your closing remarks in one line. What would you like us to go away with from this particular conversation?
I think it would be great if people would start growing more food, fruits in particular, and vegetables in the gardens, in pots, so that children get excited about seeing things grow, picking them and eating them.
Great. Doreen.
Well, this year when we celebrated the World Breastfeeding Week, we said breastfeeding is the foundation of life. If you have a good foundation, you have a good building. So if you invest in all the help you can get to help you breastfeed your child, the rewards are immense for everybody who is involved.
Okay.
And for me, it's beyond breastfeeding. It's having a holistic approach and using children as change agents. Once children understand that they can be participants in having a balanced diet at home, educating even their teachers on what a balanced diet is, then I think we are moving in the right direction.
Great. And Lydia?
And for me, it is trying as much as possible to invest in the early years so that we feed our children better when they are still young, because I'm concerned about children who are in boarding schools, who spend like a whole 3 months out there, and what they're eating is not as good as it should be. So let's try as much as possible as parents to give our children what is good when we have them, but also try and bring these educators like myself to make sure that when children are with us, they eat healthy.
Right. So I'm supposed to close right now, but there's something I forgot to ask. And this was when a parent says, my child refuses to eat. They don't like to eat, and a lot of parents have that complaint. What do we do? Very quickly, if somebody can give a bit of advice to a parent who has that.
There are people called picky eaters, and picky eaters are made worse when there's conflict. So if mom is stressed or dad is stressed, the child will be stressed, and they are trying to prove a point. So the best is this parent needs to be counseled and take it easy. Children are children. They are not adults. So they need to be supported to feed in a way that they are comfortable with.
Okay.
I think we need to look at, in addition to that, we need to look at the environment in which you want the child to eat. Is the television on? Is it stressful for the child to eat? Sometimes when they refuse to eat, a mother forces them, and they begin to associate eating with negative events. So look at all these things. How are you preparing the food? Is it colorful? Is it exciting to eat? Have they participated? So there are so many things you look at when you say child has refused to eat. I speak on behalf of the young ones. They like eating, like at least they should be taking something every 2 hours. So let us not mix main meals with snacks and those, you know, if it is time for water, let children have water. If it is for a light snack, let them have a light snack. And if it's for the main meal, let them. And you try to teach them to know when it's enough. It's basically about training. And emotional eating.
Emotional eating should be restricted.
All right. Yes, Audrey, you wanted to say?
Sometimes we mix up thirst and hunger as well. So sometimes children are eating when actually they are just
thirsty. Yes.
Okay.
And then sometimes children need to be comforted, and we don't want to do it, so you give food.
But they should balance exercise and eating. I mean, don't slouch on your TV watching and
And eat.
But if that's what the parent is doing, then the child is going to do it. Well, thank you all very much for coming on the panel tonight to talk about child nutrition. I hope it was a very helpful conversation for whoever is out there watching. And that's it for our show for tonight. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.